Okay.
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So I'm going to jump in. One of the things that, one of the reasons why I started really looking at Piaget's schema is, as a believer in play-based learning, what I was finding is a lack of articulation. From a theoretical point of view, everyone says, oh, kids need to play. This is really good for them. And then nothing else. And so what happened is we started getting caught in this quagmire of basically a poorly articulated framework regarding how we were observing children and the reasons why we were advocating play and doing certain practices and procedures in the classrooms that support play, because of course they're not learning when they're playing. So what I found was a lack of articulation and a very needed way of observing children. And as a, not just as a practitioner, but as an instructor, I kept looking for this articulation. And as I was doing some research around play in the UK and other places, I noticed that they were using Piaget a lot in his schema. And I was wondering, gosh, why haven't we been doing this? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but this is what I have hanging in the classroom. The goal of education is to create possibilities for children to invent and discover. And this is something that we all believe in, but we don't know necessarily how to define it to others. And there are some tensions that we are still faced with, and that's play-based learning versus direct instruction and skill acquisition. And this is where that readiness piece comes in. We've got to get them ready for kindergarten, and in kindergarten, you've got to get them ready for first grade. It's like, what I want to do is have everyone just stop and pause and think about that. Why are we trying to ready them? Joseph Chilton Pierce, who wrote The Magical Child, said that the 3-year-old is not an imperfect 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old is not an imperfect 5-year-old. And so in our quest to ready the next generation, does that not include allowing them to developmentally be purely 3 or to be purely 4, instead of jumping them ahead and leaving gaps behind them because they haven't completed developmentally being 3 or being 4? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those were my questions. The other tension is the child-led learning versus standard-based learning. So I want to introduce a book. I don't know if people have seen this one. It's called Resisting the Kinder Race, and it's by Christopher Brown, Restoring Joy to Early Learning. Now, this is from, I want to say Teachers College Press. Let me see. Let me just double check. Yes, it's Teachers College Press. He doesn't just throw it out there. He's done an amazing amount of research around this issue. And he also comes then behind with some solutions. And he's bringing in his instance, he's bringing Froebel up with how kindergarten originated, and goes through some historical things of how we got where we are with some of the things that have happened in here in the US with Common Core and No Child Left Behind. So he goes through and creates this amazing picture of what was, how we got here, and what we might want to look at in order to restore joyful learning in the classroom for young children. He's not saying, let's throw it all out. He's not saying, let's go back to the old days. He's saying, with the research that we have, we can certainly restore joy back into the classrooms for young children, because we're losing teachers. Teachers are leaving the field because they don't like what they're doing. Intuitively, they know that some of what we're doing is harming young children, but they don't know what to do with, and they don't feel empowered, and they feel more defeated. And this is happening not just in early elementary years, but it's also happening in the early childhood years too, from ages birth on to 5. We're losing a lot of our practitioners. They're done. They feel as though all they're doing is pushing paperwork all day long, and they've got check boxes that they have to make sure, because it's a deficit lens rather than a proactive strength-based lens, as Piaget and Froebel gives us. What has been created with standards-based learning is a deficit-based. You look at what the child does not know, and then that's what we have to do now. Rather than looking at the strengths of the child through a theoretical lens, such as Piaget's schema, and then supporting those strengths and those interests, that will lead to being able to check off your boxes. It blends and molds very nicely in with standards-based learning, but we just need to understand how to look at it. Individual whole child assessment practices versus standardization and outcome-based accountability, which is a huge burden on the shoulders of many of our teachers, because they're being held to this fire, this accountability. And one of the things that happened is when in the 90s, when the ABC bill came down and was supported to give more money to Head Start, a lot of strings came attached, and that's when the accountability pieces started to flow in. And this is where your check boxes started to show up. And this is where teachers started to be held to taking pictures of the child every single minute to show that they're doing something, and waiting now for the child to actually do something, then capturing that moment. So the authenticity of our observations have slowly declined into waiting for that moment when the child picks up the block and puts it on top of another block, and now snap, we got the picture, and now we can check that off that the child knows how to stack blocks. So we're losing some of the spontaneity in our work, and it's actually taking away our intuition. It's taking away what we know, what we've studied hard to know, and peeling that away with others telling us this is what actually needs to be done. Developmentally appropriate practices are still there, but we have elementary school preparation, getting them ready for elementary school. We cannot rewire children. We cannot rewire them. The 3-year-old is going to be a 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old. They're going to be that age. They're going to be those developmental places. And we need to give respect to that and to strengthen what they already know. If someone came up to me and said, you don't know this, and this very well, and that's what we're going to work on. Instead of saying, you're really strong here and here, and using that window and that door to go through and support me with what I know really well, and to help me then integrate what I might need strengthening. It's a very natural occurrence. And so what Schema does, and here's a picture of his book right down there. Schemas operate within all stages of development. They grow in content and sophistication through the lifespan. We carry some of these schemas with us into the adult years. It recognizes patterns in children's play. It allows children the freedom to actively explore and express developing ideas and curiosities through play. It allows them to be children. It provides a language for us to describe how children gain information about their world. We then develop an appreciation and a reverence for play, and then we can proactively support them in our planning and in our practices. And there again is his book. Is there any thoughts so far?
Rebecca, could you give an example of a schema?
I'm going to show you lots of schema.
Okay.
I'm going to do that. So supporting the urge to play, and why we do that. One, it expands learning in the most natural and holistic way. Our observations then become very authentic. They're not contrived, and they're not just set up like in a framework. Okay, now go do this so I can get this picture and check this off on the box. It allows knowledge to enter the brain by all possible avenues through their whole body. Some of the one phrase that floats around the hallways at SOU is children are not brains on a stick. And so it comes through their sensory systems, it comes through sight and sound and movement, language, and in their relationships. And relationships is key because they're going to develop relationships not just with others as their world grows, but also with events. The block structure falls down. Somebody says they don't like me. And the resources then that we provide as practitioners to expand on what it is that they want, what they want to know. Do you need more blocks? Do you need more ramps? Do you need more balls? Curiosity and experience leads the acquisition of knowledge, always. I'm afraid that we are diffusing children's right to be curious and to use experience as a teacher. Knowledge over information is data collecting. We give them knowledge, we give them facts, but all we're doing really is just collecting data rather than informing the child to go and figure this out. Now, here is one of the schema. This is transporting, dumping, pouring, picking things up, moving stuff all over the place. And this, here we go, we're moving. Moving stuff out. And these three move the classroom every day. We find stuff piled up or transformed, which is another schema, because schema overlap. This is not one isolated schema. So transporting, they finally got tired of transporting their friend. So she got out of the basket and they just picked it up and just moved it to wherever it was. But they create all of these setups all over the classroom and on the playground. They are key to transporting. The next one is trajectory. This is horizontal, vertical, diagonal movement of stuff. So I love this one. This is our playground. So even though this person is also transporting this other child, the trajectory and the movement of a thing and a person and trajectory. You saw the boy running across, that is also a form of trajectory. And this one's a hoot. I love this one. See what he did? He called me over and he says, you got to come see this. So watch it really, because it happens really fast. He's painting. You see the brush go across the room? It was funny, it was humorous. And sometimes I think we lose that in the process of working with children. Well, you shouldn't have thrown the brush. He didn't throw the brush. He was using momentum in his artistic strokes, and the brush just happened to fly out of his hand and went across the room. Circularity and rotation. Now, anything with wheels, anything that spins, anything that moves. So we've got lots of wheeled toys. Now, with this little guy, it's not only a circularity and rotation, it's also trajectory and transporting, because if you look real close, he's got a shovel in that dump truck. This little person is using the labyrinth with the dump truck and moving around in a circular motion. Circularity in mark making, we call it mark making, and in painting, you can see how this child made a circular image, and a circle is one of the very first shapes, real shapes that a child masters. Otherwise, we're in the scribbling stage. That's kind of another conversation around children's mark making and their art. But then you look at what they did. They used marks on the inside of that circle, and we'll get to that because that's also a schema called enclosure. So now we're looking at several schema with rotation and circularity being possibly the primary one. And then the question is, how do we support that? Well, we give them lots of paper, lots of paint, lots of pencils, lots of different kinds of mark making tools, and large blocks of time, which is something that some programs are missing. They have so many transitions to get 15 minutes here, you get to do 15 minutes here, and then 10 minutes here, and then we're going to do this. And we're dividing up their day too much and not allowing them enough time to fully explore. A young child might take 20 to 45 minutes to settle into an activity. So it's very, very important for us to allow blocks of time within our day for children to actively explore their surroundings and the materials. Rotation and circularity. These are just some little boards with wheels. They don't just get up and do that. We've had children that were wanting to do it, but they were really frightened. And so we walked them up, holding their hand, setting it up, showing them how it can work. And then after that, we kind of let go of it. And then it's like, if you don't want to do this again, that's fine. And you can wait until you can do it yourself. This one is good too. We got lots of loose parts, lots of stuff on the playground. These are just tires that just sort of showed up one day. I think tire rolling should be in the Olympics. They got really, really good at it. And there's different places on the playground where they would roll it down a hill, and we set up, try and aim between these two things. They got really good at it. This is another form of rotation circularity. This is a chalk spinning board. And what I did was I took, you have those plates you can buy at the hardware store, and they're actually to help whatever you've got on top of it spin. So I took this circular piece of wood and painted it with chalkboard paint. And my husband helped put it on the thing. And now we've got these spinning boards. So now you got circularity and rotation. And you can see how he's drawing that. He's drawing that somewhat inward. The early stages, children will draw inward towards their heart. As they get a little older, it'll start moving outward. And even when they're at the water table, the younger the child, they'll pour inward. That's where all the mess comes. And then as they get a little older, they start going outward, away from that core. And this one, again, the circle's the first shape the child masters in their drawings. And you see how this little person drew lots and lots. Now, if you look closely, you'll see a little line. Well, what they did is they took a stapler and they stapled one staple in each of these circles. So now you've got number. I'm going to go off a little bit away from schema and go into developmental domains. I've got one-to-one correspondence or one-to-one matching. And then they drew these straight lines, a trajectory. And there is a process. If you look at Rhoda Kellogg, she categorized children's art, thousands and thousands from around the world. And they are now cataloged. And you can look up Rhoda Kellogg and get more information on the work that she did. And that's another conversation. Positioning, children arranging objects or even themselves. So we've got some sticks and circles. We've got these seashells and rocks. And then this one is another form of positioning. We got big pieces of wood. They're trying to get a ramp-like structure so they can roll down balls and pine cones. Now, these are older kids. I want you to look at the thinking. These are kids that are going into kindergarten. They're correcting, thinking, discussing. Oopsie doodle. So Now they've got to come back and rethink that strategy. This is where disequilibrium comes in. So Piaget talked about equilibrium and disequilibrium. So the world is lovely, everything is going well, we are total equilibrium, and then something happens. Now we are in disequilibrium. Our thinking goes awry because we were met with a piece of information that we're unfamiliar with. So now they've got to come back and voluntarily are figuring out what to do about this. So this guy gets a hoe, it's a garden hoe for children, and he sticks it over there with a rock. They still have it on the tires. There's my big thumb in the way. Watch what he does. He's destined to be an engineer or something. See how he's testing it out? So when you look around our playground, you're not going to find little tyke stuff. You're going to find, in some cases, some loose parts like the tires, big pieces of wood, long branches that the trees have donated, rocks, dirt, a big sand digging area, Tonka trucks, shovels. You're going to find some old dishes around the water area. We really try not to purchase anything brand new unless we absolutely have to and there's no other way around it. But we try and use and reuse things as much as we possibly can. I feel that that really allows the children to think more open-endedly and more about possibilities rather than narrowing their thinking with some scripted item. So we try and keep things as open-ended as we possibly can. Orientation, this is just how kids place their bodies so they can see things from a different perspective. There's actually a little person behind this block structure. That block structure is actually there's actually a category for that. It's a pattern, if you look really closely, how the child has built that, and they're kind of peeking through it. And then, of course, the tires here, when the tires first came in, the kids wanted to climb on it, and we let them do that, but there were people close by. I want you to know we had the risk thing covered, but it's the way of them getting up higher and to see the world from a different point of view. And of course, this little guy, he took these large blocks and built them and made himself a chair. Transforming, they change stuff. We want them to be able to change and move things around and transform things. This is clay. It looks like a chicken leg, but it's actually clay. And of course, when we do face painting, the children get to do their own art on their bodies. When they're transforming, you have to respect the creative process. It's usually pretty messy, and that's okay. This is interesting. This is just melting crayons with a hot plate. They're hard to come by now, but when we find them, we grab them. Piece of foil. There is a piece of paper under there. And we introduced a different way of picking up the crayon because it was a little bit hot. We got some tweezers for the kids, but just a different way of transforming things. And this is also science. When you start using heat, the 4 elements, heat or fire, we don't actually build fires, but heat, air, wind, the water, and the earth are the 4 elements that we also pay attention to. We also pay attention to the seasons. So as the seasons roll around, we're looking at early spring, late spring, summer, and then early fall, late fall, early winter, late winter, and all the things that are going on in a natural way that we can bring in as part of the curriculum. This is enclosure, and we talked a little bit about the other art piece further up. And this person, I gave the kids permanent markers to draw their own lines. I figure if we want kids coloring inside of lines, we could at least respect them enough to draw their own lines. So we gave them permanent markers with watercolor, and she drew this grid and then started placing watercolor in each one. Now, this is also math. It's also a form of understanding number 1 to 1. It's also a way of dividing. She's divided that by using the grid idea. And so when we say number and numeracy in mathematics, children have their own way of creating that. And as a practitioner, I can then come behind and have a meaningful conversation with her. And I can also demonstrate and articulate this child's level of understanding of numeracy. And of course, it's just a beautiful piece. Enclosure and block play, enclosure with the tires, there's a little person in there, enclosure with our big sticks, building forts. Enveloping, they cover themselves completely, or they just cover their heads. These are foam bricks that I think actually came from the drama department once upon a time, and we just somehow ended up with them. So there's a little person under there. Enveloping can also happen with something like a cardboard box. One of the kids walked in one day and wanted a box to paint. So now all of a sudden I've got several kids that want to paint the boxes, came out with a little knife, and I asked if anybody wanted me to cut holes. And so they drew lines where they wanted things to be cut. So this little guy created a garage for his little cars, took that home and played with it forever. And other people built castles and superhero caves and other things. And this is child led. This isn't something that I just wrote down on a curriculum sheet. We do write things down, but when this happens, this is child led. And so we follow. And I can set up curriculum in the following week around what I've seen the kids do and bring in more provisions for them to explore these ideas. Connecting and disconnecting, they do this with paper. They're disconnecting keyboards here. So we give them any types of supplies that they can put together and take apart. We've got staplers and tape and glue at the mark making table, and just long pieces of paper, short pieces. These are just scraps that came and got cut off of something else that we were doing. And they put that together, and this little person, I know he named it, but then he drew on it. So he's got circularity, he's got enclosure, he's got lots of schema overlapping here. And this is the intelligence of children. Someone might look at that and say, oh, okay, that's interesting, without really looking at it and studying it and seeing the motor skills and the thinking, the top to bottom understanding, the left to right understanding. And there's symmetry on this. And then this one is just hysterical. Came out of my office and they had literally taped a whole bunch of stuff to the side of a table. So they connected, and there's a stapler right there, and they're trying to figure out how to get the rest of the staples up there without them falling down, because staplers are a little bit heavier. So humor is a good thing. And we had a great conversation around this. And of course, they helped pick it up afterwards. But why would I stop them from doing this? The conversations that they were having around this, I could not have replicated in a lesson plan at any other time and in any other place. Scattering is a big one, and they feel that scattering is a fairly new schema, because we now have generations of children who have lots and lots of stuff. And so in order for them to make sense of it, they have to kind of dump it out so they can get to the bottom of it. If it's just in a bin, they can't see it. So we had these cardboard tubes, and my husband drilled holes at the side so that there could be some building potential. But when we introduced them, here's what they did. They just took them out, they scattered them around, and they started just feeling them and touching them and walking over them and, laying them out and seeing what they would do. Total exploration, going through a boundary. There's a big we do cardboard boxes. Facilities loves us because all of a sudden we'll be done with them. There's a whole pile of cardboard boxes out there for them to take care of for us. But this one is just a child going through the box and turning it into an idea. This you might recognize. This is a placemat. You can get it at a Hobby Lobby. This one happens to be in the shape of a leaf, but there's also circles and there's holes. It's like a mesh, but it's a very thick vinyl. We put that on the easel and give them paint where they can kind of pounce it in those holes. And when you pull it back, you have this wonderful color and formation that's left on the back side. So you've got cause and effect. You've got a positive and a negative on paper. And then, of course, you've got going through a boundary. Are these good examples, Andrea? Okay. So
Thank you.
in that, we first have to observe. We have to use our minds. As a practitioner, we have to use our minds, integrating what we know about child development, children's play patterns or schema, their interests and their strengths. So we have to start listening with our eyes. We have to do a lot more looking. We have to hear, but we also have to do a lot more deep looking. When a child walks up to me and says, "Do you like this?" I turn it over to them. I say, "Well, do you like it?" "Well, yeah. Do you like if I hold it this way or this way? Or if you look at it this way or this way, which way do you like it better?" Because I want them to take ownership. I don't want the adult to have the final say. I want them to have more of an intrinsic value to what they are doing and to whom they are. And then we make the decisions with our heart, our intuition, our wisdom. We integrate all of this information that we've gotten, their understanding of the world, using their family culture, their communities, and their spiritual lives, and remembering that schema describes how children gain information about their world, and the child is the curriculum. And after this, I've just got a whole bunch of slides. So that is my presentation. And I'm so sorry again that I was late. But if you have time and you want to have more conversation, I am open. Hi, Young Hee. Any comments? Any tensions? Any curiosities?
I've got a question.
Sure.
I'm just curious. You mentioned Piaget. When you studied, did you? What other educators were some of your favorites?
Froebel,
Okay.
Dewey.
Okay.
Pestalozzi came before Froebel, so that was kind of Froebel's mentor. Those primarily for me, helped me start seeing children in a more, I'm going to say holistic, but I don't want it to become just a trendy word. Started seeing them in a more authentic lens, rather than seeing what I needed to teach them because they need to know that before they get into kindergarten, which really isn't true. A lot of the things that we're thinking and delivering is not even the truth of what they really need to know. Kindergarten teachers are asking that their small motor skills be as developed as possible. They're asking if they can be able to take care of their own belongings. They're asking that they have some sense of a social understanding socially what's going on, that they can tend to another adult, that they feel comfortable in a classroom with others, and that they can not necessarily share, but if a teacher puts a basket of crayons in the middle of the table, they're not just going to take it and grab it. They're going to understand with some guidance that, these crayons can be used and you don't have to worry. There's plenty of crayons for everyone. And that young children going into kindergarten can kind of navigate a day. Kindergarten's a long day. We're asking a lot of little children. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Rebecca, could you turn off your screen share so we can see each other better?
Yeah,
And then I
there,
do have a question.
sure.
So the things you named, transporting, positioning, trajectory, orientation, transforming, enclosure, you mentioned numeracy, but it didn't mention it as a schema.
No, I mentioned it as probably a domain, because in your domains, you've got math, numeracy, you've got
Okay.
science, you've got cognition, you've got physical development. Those are your domains, which are a little different from schema. There's been a lot of emphasis on the domains, but they've kind of narrowed people's vision of how to see children. What's happened is the domains have become the message. So if a child isn't counting, then we need to sit down, we need to deliberately show the child how to count. Rather than setting up the provisions in the classroom, say with positioning, with all the loose parts, and give them things to touch and feel, and then it just naturally progresses into that. And the teacher can sit down and count with them, but they're touching numbers. What isn't put in the hand and what isn't felt in the heart is not going to necessarily go in the brain. They have to touch it and feel. They need to feel it in their hands. How many? How much?
So yeah, so my question is more than about, okay, we have the domains, which are more like content, and then
Right.
the schema, which are more like different aspects of sensory awareness and movement and very
Those are
physical.
play behaviors, what I would call play behaviors. And those are very dominant in children's play if we set up an environment that will allow it. When we have the kids come in and we've got the environment set up, they direct their behaviors to whatever that urge is telling them. So if it's painting, and if it's a certain kind of painting, if it's grinding, and we have lots of things to set up. We've watched them and we say, they're really into, grinding stuff right now. So let's put out anything grinding. We're seeing that maybe somebody's small motor skills is just a little, let's put out the clay or the Play-Doh because this is going to help them. And then lots and lots of loose parts, and then watch and see what they do. And so as we're articulating it, and as I'm working with practicum students, it helps the practicum student look and see what the kids are doing rather than saying, oh, they're just messing around with clay. It's like, no, you go watch and see what their body is doing with the clay. And so it goes a little bit deeper. And then we can say motor skills, domain. We can say motor skill. We can say, oh, the child made all these little tiny balls and then counted them. Numeracy, cognition.
So where does in this schema of, it's kind of like a very complex schema of play and paying attention to the details, but then where do things like self-knowledge and social skills and social capacities, because there's lots of different ways that we can observe how kids are interacting socially too, that don't fall into the sensory motor skills domain.
Right, because Piaget paid more attention to that. Vygotsky brought in the social pieces in context. And so and when we're in together in the classroom, that's a huge social dynamic. So even though we might be paying attention to schema, we've got 3 or 4 kids at the table having these conversations. Out on the playground, we've got them running amok, creating play scenarios with rules and language and lots of other things. So schema is part of our puzzle that gives us a large picture of who the children are. And so right now I'm talking about this little puzzle called schema, but with that, it wouldn't even exist without the social pieces going on, because that drives, being a social being drives our energy and drives us to wanting to play, wanting to be part of a group, wanting to be here and be happy. Is that good?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
still curious how all these different schema interact, because there's the social component and the schema, and like even things like coloring and how they
Mhm.
experiment with color. Is that another schema, or is that something else that's
Well,
yeah.
color and having exploration, when I'm looking at it, I'm going to watch their arm movement and seeing what they're doing, because I want to see how developmentally their bodies are moving. But the easel is like 3 people can stand at the easel. And so now you've got this kid going around here and saying, look what I did. And so they go around and say, oh, that's pretty cool. And then the other one is going around to the other side, well, look what I can do. And another child comes by and says, well, I want to do that too. And so the social pieces help drive, they're interconnected. The social piece drives what children want to do because we're social beings, but schema is a way to observe them, their play patterns, and then to be able to come back and say, how can we support this? And when you've got 24 kids in the classroom, very rarely is one child just acting by themselves. In the house area, we might have 6 or 7 children. And developmentally, when it comes to the social pieces, this young, you've got different levels of play. You've got your parallel play, your solitaire play, then you've got associative play, and then you've got more complex play where they start coming together as a group and start creating rules. So when you saw the little guy sitting up in the block area on his chair, he was overseeing a whole thing going on with the blocks and telling people what he thought about it. He was like the contractor. And the other kids down on the bottom were building something. And he was like up there just kind of doing a whole narrative about the whole thing. And so the social pieces do intertwine. But it's, to me, it's much more natural. It's much more natural. I don't have to read a Berenstain Bears book about certain behaviors, about sharing or whatever we want to call it, because it's happening right before my eyes. And so if I want to set aside the schema and pull out the social and emotional pieces, what I've got is natural occurrences that we now get to address in a very natural way as it's happening. Somebody took away that block that I was going to use. Okay, how do we navigate that? So that's not a schema. That is a social interaction, and now an opportunity for us to lay some groundwork with one another. And by the end of the school year, the kids are taking care of all of this by themselves. They have the lingo. We have a language. Are you using it? Can I have it when you're done? I was still using that. I want it back. By the end of the school year, they've got the lingo, and they also have the respect because we've set that up at the beginning of the school year. So they can take care of these things by themselves. Now, this next year, we graduated out a lot of kindergartners. We've got their siblings coming, and we've got a lot of other threes and early 4s coming. We're so excited because it's going to be so much fun. It's going to pull us back into that 3-year-old, 4-year-old early stages. And we're just so excited about just what we're going to be able to do with that. Because when they get older, they get a little bit more self-sufficient. And it's like, sometimes I feel like I could just leave the classroom and they take care of things by themselves. And now I feel like, okay, that was my job. I did my job. They're self-sufficient. They're ready to go. But now we've got these brand new ones coming, and it's going to be, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much fun. So much fun. So we get to go back.
So I have another question if someone else
Yes.
doesn't, because you, by the way, everyone, Rebecca supervises like half of my practicum students. So learning from Rebecca, I'm always learning through my students about what's happening in Rebecca's preschool. One of the things the practicum students mention a lot is how surprised they are about staying hands off and learning to observe without interacting so much. But now today, here I had a chance in my household to observe my great niece, who is almost 3 years old. And she was with us, 3 adults, and her little baby brother, who's 2 months old. And she was doing so many things, and she was making ice cream, and at grandma's house, I'm at grandma's house and the great grandma's house, and there's so much stuff, toys for kids. And so she engages with certain ones, but then all of a sudden she had this idea. Oh, it was a brilliant idea. She went and found the puzzle flat things, plastic things that are in the puzzle room that my mom and I do. And they had been dumped, the puzzle pieces were dumped out, and she made them into surfboards. None of us even know how she knew about surfing, but she did. And she was totally into surfing, and she kept inviting us to surf with her. We, of course,
Mhm.
did not want to step on the puzzle boards and break them.
Right.
She could step on them, we couldn't. But she kept inviting us to be playing with her. And we were like, no, it's all right. You can do it, but we don't need to. But so the kids, if they're inviting you in, it's okay to participate. But when they're not inviting
Yes.
you in, you just kind of let them be. Is that?
Yes. That's that fine line. When she was immersed in her play and doing this and this and this, the rest of the world around her totally disappeared for her. That's not the time. We call it a zone. That's not the time for us to be intruding, because it is an intrusion. And asking them what color it is, what shape it is, how many it is. If you know the answer, don't ask the question. That would be an intrusion, because what happens is now her creativity has just been cut off. And it can take anywhere, if you're busy at doing something on the computer and you're like in that zone, hammering this thing out, and all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, oh, time's up. So what happens to that thinking? Even though you can go back to the work later, it's never the same. And so that's where that fine line is. So when she looked up and came out of that deep thought, she now saw you as a potential playmate. And now she invited you. When a child is very engrossed in something, I just kind of stand back and I'm just kind of watching. And all of a sudden they will look up and they'll say, look, teacher, that is the invitation. It's not for you to add a judgment. They're not asking for your opinion. They're asking for you to look. And if you've been looking, you will say something like, I've been watching and noticing how you took these colors and you made new colors, and how when you went up and down, this and this happened. And when you did this, this happened. That's authentic noticing. And now what you're doing is you're putting language to their motions, to what it is that they did. And now you're having a real conversation.
Well, her grandmother, my sister-in-law, was trying to get her to play with the upwards game, which has these little blocks with letters on it. And she turned those little things into ice cream in her ice cream machine. And she was just so into shifting whatever it was into her world. And she just did it effortlessly. It was beautiful.
Yes. And
she did
without
it for
judgment.
2 hours. It was just constant.
Oh my gosh, I know. And if you had forced her to sit there with the ABC thing, she would have left. She said, no, I'm not doing this. When we say kids have short attention spans, I think it's only when it's something that they don't really want to do. And now we do know that children at some point are going to have to understand that there's going to be some things that they don't have to do. They're going to have to do that regardless. But right now may not be the time. So because they can't go back. Once they hit 8, 9 years old, they can't come back to this type of thinking. And we certainly can't go back either. The way that we go into seeing a child's thinking is through the invitation that they give us, which is an honor, and by observing. And then be able to articulate what we've observed and be able to put it into a language to share with others.
So,
and as a grown-up, go ahead.
I'm just keep thinking, because I was watching it. We were just all watching her today. And she, like, when the grown-up, my sister-in-law, her grandmother, went and got the colors and the coloring book, again, she was not interested in coloring. She organized the colors and then she turned around and did something else. So every time someone like tried to interest her in something, she was in this whole other
In her
mode.
zone. She was in a much different zone, and it's magical.
Uh,
It's very magical thinking. And again, there's a very short window in our lifespan when this actually occurs. And we're discounting that, and we need to bring it back. That's that hugely creative place where children are at. I'll never forget when I have a picture up here. I'm not going to climb and get it, but my daughter drew this picture when she was in preschool, and we have a friend who's an artist, and he went, "Oh my gosh." I can't remember who said it, but basically, maybe it was Picasso that said that he was spent a lifetime trying to draw like a child. And you don't achieve that. But he admired that, her picture. And then she got into grade school, and it went away.
hmm.
She decided that she could no longer draw. She doesn't know how. And then she got into middle school and took an art class, and it started coming back. And she started enjoying art again. And that, in my opinion, shouldn't happen. Children should have access to things like art and music all through their academic career. It plays on different places of the brain and stimulates so many things. And art is sort of a multidisciplinary thing. When I watch a child take a paintbrush and go down and across, they're dividing up that paper. That's math. And then I watched a little guy, he did that, and then he drew circles in each one of the quadrants. Then he did something else, but basically it was all symmetric. And I was in a far distance, and I was watching because I didn't want to intrude. I had my camera with the zoom lens. I'm like, watching the sequence of how this thing was going to pan out. So when he was done, he put down the paintbrush and he just heaved this huge sigh, because he was in that zone, this huge zone. And then he turned around looking for somebody to share it with. He turned around, he saw me standing off at the distance. He said, "Teacher, come look." That was my invitation now to walk into his world without intruding. And we stood there for a good 5 minutes talking about what he did first, but I had photos of the whole sequence. Just talking and discussing about, how did you do that? Well, first I did this, and then I thought about this and this. I was like, you can't put that down on a planning form. That happens because you did plan. You did allow for these moments. You put provisions in your classroom. You've got paint available. You've got blocks. You've got water and dirt. You've got enough baking soda and vinegar to blow up the school. I mean, you've got these things already provisioned. That's where your planning is. But your planning can't happen until you know the children. We have a guideline that we follow because we pay attention to the 4 elements and the seasons, and we know that 3-year-olds are coming, so we want to kind of bring out different songs and finger plays and lots of body types of things for them, because we're not going to be expecting them to sit in a group thing for very long at all. So we've got this going. We've got that going on in the background, but we can't wait for the kids to get there, because it's just stuff. It's just stuff until the kids get there. And then the real magic starts to happen. But that's when our eyes have to be really authentically looking and feeling what's going on with the children. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm still thinking a lot about my great nieces because I'm going to be interacting with all of them. I have
Well,
4
I'm just
great
going to say
nieces
she's
and
brilliant.
4 great
4.
nephews.
Oh my
Wonderful.
gosh.
Um,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah, Jovi is wonderful, but then I have this other one who's 5, and she makes her 8-year-old sister super jealous a lot. And so anyway, I'm
Yeah,
still
they're
thinking all
all
summer
different,
about how to
and they're all
interact
different.
with all
So, and then you've got male, female.
Mm.
As people don't want to talk about gender play, but it exists. And so you've got sometimes this more robust type of play. And as women, we come at it from a very female perspective at times, and we need to really look at male play and realize that they're not going to blow anything up, but allow them for robust play, but also put the appropriate parameters around that as well, so that they don't break the furniture. Certain things cannot be allowed in the house. They have to go
Oh, yeah,
outside.
there are 3 boys in one of my niece's families, and they're between certain ages, and it's just I can't
Yeah,
even be around it. It's
I
too
know.
energetic for me.
They come with different sound effects.
Yeah.
I raised 2 boys, and I got our sweet little daughter right at the very tail end. She's the caboose. And the boys, honest to goodness, um, they made a lot of noise. They made a lot of noise with their play.
Yeah, we had them in the house for 3 hours the day before, and I just couldn't.
Okay.
It
And you
was
still have furniture. That is good. That is good. Yeah, their play is more robust. You saw the boy who was, doing this across the art paper. They have testosterone spikes, and they'll have a lot of them. And it's just an energy surge. And when one goes, they all go at the same time. And so that's when outside, we're all going outside right now. So you have to kind of be prepared for that. So heavy things to carry, heavy things to do, hammers and nails.
One of the little boys who's 6 tried to get a great big stone because we were out at a creek. And
Yes.
he went, and his dad got so upset because he was so afraid he was going to hurt himself with that great big stone.
What did he
And
want to do with the
actually,
stone?
he wanted to put it into the creek, which would have made a dam, which we're in a retirement home, and it wasn't a good
You
idea.
can't do that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But make note of that, because
he
you
likes
might be
to
able to
move
do
big
something
things.
outside with some stones and water play. Just make a note of that.
Yeah,
The
I have
inner
another
world of children. They're just
5-year-old.
so
Yeah,
mysterious.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
they
this
are.
is my summer this summer, as I'm getting to
Oh,
do
good.
this.
I am so jealous of you. I'm trying to get my grandson, he's 13, but I'm trying to get my grandson flown out here. His sister probably won't come because she's a little bit shy, but I miss my grandkids. How dare they move to Arizona and get a really good job?
Oh.
Well, I want
Any other
to
questions?
thank you, Rebecca. I feel really inspired. I feel like I learned a lot in this session.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for being late. I got caught up in something, had the wrong time written down, and that's on me. So
It happens. We're just so
It
happy
does.
that you were able to share with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope that one day I can have half the wisdom you do into being able to see what's happening with children. That was really.
You're just gonna have to get old, Andrew.
I mean,
You
I'm
just gotta
hoping
get
so.
You will. One of my things was I had this curiosity to know more than what people were telling me. And I found really good mentors that I admired. And one day I sat with one of my mentors. I said, "How did you get here? What do you read that you find so fascinating that drives your thinking?" And she said, "Nobody's ever asked me that before." And that's when she started pulling out her reading lists. And that's where, Piaget showed up, and even some other types of readings that were just inspiration, not necessarily connected to education, but in a way did, was just inspiring reading, which we should all be doing anyway. But from there, I realized that I am empowered to take my own learning and drive it into different areas. And so I became, when I was reading some stuff from the UK about their early childhood foundations, because they do things very differently than we do, and their understanding is different. And that's when I ran across Schema. And I went, what is this? Because you study Piaget in college, right? You study Vygotsky, but it's not connected to our classroom practices. And that's one of the things I'm trying to resolve, because that's that's keeping our students from becoming better practitioners. When we're not helping them connect theory in the classroom, it doesn't give them a good voice then when they have to advocate for why it is they're doing certain things. So
You just
something
answered the question that I have been holding. You literally
struggling
answered the
yes,
exact question I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was it. I
Yeah,
don't even have
you
to
are
ask
welcome.
it. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So you feel empowered to go to these authors that have written these amazing books and these people who are deep thinkers, and you are free to glean from them what is going to help you in your work.
Yeah.
I'm giving it to you because some of us can't keep doing this forever. There has to be, this is called reseeding. And one of my parts of my own personal mission statement is to reseed the next generation so that you guys will pick up where we leave off. We don't need to keep reinventing this. You guys are going to pick this up and you're going to carry it forward and hopefully make even more good, do more than what we were able to do, because time just doesn't give us enough sometimes. So it's up to you guys. So do that. Do that
Expect
for
an
me.
email. Expect an email from me. Maybe
Okay.
after I read. Which one was it? Resisting the Kinder Race. After I read
Yeah.
that one, expect an email for more
I will.
recommendations.
Oh, I've got a stack over here. See, I didn't turn my computer all the way because this is the good part. This is what looks really good. The rest of it's like, oh my goodness.
I'm facing a wall.
I know. I know. Good for you.
Well, thank you,
All
Rebecca.
right.
Thanks everyone for
welcome.
being here, and
Thank you.
we hope
Thank
to